Well, I previously mentioned that I like to make chairs, and the center of chair making to me is a shaving horse. And when I got the opportunity to take my very first chair class with Brian Boggs, well, it was the only class, but he required us to have a shaving horse when we came to class. And in the message that I read about it, they would have some draw knives and spokeshaves for sale, but we needed a shaving horse. So about 2 weeks prior to that class, I spent many hours thinking and trying to figure out what a shaving horse should do. I looked in books for them. I'd never seen one, never used one, and so this was what I made. And it's patterned somewhat after the John Alexander shaving horse, which is a Swiss style shaving horse, and with all of the holes for adjustment of height here with the pin and the crossbar for gripping, and the pedal here for gripping your piece of wood, and using your spoke shave or your draw knife to shave your parts. And the draw knife is such a wonderful tool. If you know how to sharpen it, I can make shavings just as fine as with my spoke shaves, but that just takes some practice. And I just really enjoy doing that, and trying to get my students to practice making these beautiful little shavings before they start trying to hog off wood. If they can create these really fine wispy shavings, they are developing this sense of control and touch over this tool. And not just fairly recent, on the back of the Fine Woodworking magazine is Curtis Buchanan. It's the Song of the Draw Knife. And Curtis is a fabulous Windsor chair maker. He and Brian Boggs have been good friends for decades, and probably 50 years almost by now. But so it is a sweet tool, but so is the spoke shave. And I really enjoy using the spoke shave, making my own spoke shaves. This is my design of a spoke shave, and I made it so that it's ergonomic. The way the handles are created, your hand just nestles into this pocket, and it leaves my wrist perfectly in line with my forearm, with no flex. Therefore, there's no torque in the wrist joint when I use my design of a spoke shave. And the handles are down low in line with the cutting edge, so that there is virtually no rolling of the tool. And so your muscles don't have to compensate all the time. And this is just another really sweet tool. And this week I have two ladies here making chairs with me. It's a mother and daughter, Carolyn and Katie, and they're making the tall shop stool or bar stool, whichever you want to use it for, but they're both woodworkers, and so they wanted to have a nice shop stool that's tall enough to set up at the workbench, and so that's what they're making. So they each have their shaving horses that they've been sitting on here this week, making their back legs and front legs and their rungs, and shaping all of these parts. And just this afternoon, right up until closing time before Mike got here, we were assembling their back leg panels with the slats and the three rear leg rungs. And they all came together just so sweet. It was nice, and and it's always thrilling. I recognize the thrill of when all these parts come together after you've made them, and they come together just right. it's just a joyous moment, you know, and I still feel that crazy excitement for having that happen each time I do it. And so before they started making their chairs, they each wanted to make a spokeshave. So Carolyn did hers out of boxwood, and so this is Carolyn's, and this is Katie's, and it's made out of bacote. And they're not quite finished yet. Certainly they haven't had the oil finishing done, but they are just about ready. The cutters are sharpened, and they're just about ready for full use. So that they're coming along nicely. And while they were making theirs, last week Mike brought me some camphor wood, and I've always smelled camphor wood in the shops, but I've never made anything with it. And so I made a spokeshave out of the camphor wood, and you can just smell it has a wonderful fragrance that you can just smell in the wood. So it's really, really nice. So that's the beauty of making your own tools, in that, you know, you can, maybe you only have one cutter, but you can make a dozen of these wooden bodies out of all different species of wood. And I do that because I just love all the different colors, and just really enjoy seeing the beauty come out of all these different species of wood. And so we've got their chair parts coming together, and certainly you can see all of the shavings. Now, for the last 3 days, they've been using the draw knife and making big shavings and very stiff shavings coming off of the bulk removal of tissue. And so once we have the back legs and the rungs and all the parts roughly shaped out, and right up when the rungs, by the way, go in a kiln to get dried and shrunk down and really shrink them before the assembly of the chair. And so we clean the floor, and then as they finish their shaping of all of their parts, they're using the spokeshave, and we'll gather these up, and we've already gathered up one full bag, and we've got another bag here ready to be picked up. And these shavings will go inside of a seat cushion like this with a flap, and we fill it full, and then we'll step on it and crush it down, and it'll get suspended with some thread on all four legs inside this seat frame before we weave the seat. So then we wrap the hickory bark around the seat, and weave the weft, and so we'll remove the thread that's suspending this seat cushion in that frame and from all four legs, and then this seat cushion is permanently inside of every one of these chairs that we make. And that way, just to give you a little additional appreciation of what makes these chairs last so long, is that the seat rung is shaped with this teardrop shape, and it'll be scraped and oil finished. Well, the oil finishing will occur tomorrow afternoon on their chairs after it's glued up, but before we weave the seat. So these will be absolutely smooth. So when we weave the hickory bark, there will be nothing here that will allow that bark to flex across a hard line and crack. We want them to be perfectly smooth and round. And then inside the seat is this cushion. So the hickory bark glides down off of these four seat rungs out onto this cushion. And so now when you sit on it, the pressure is transmitted to the lower weave on the bottom side of the chair, and that way it doesn't have to sag before the lower weave starts carrying its share of the load. So the combination of this shape of seat rung and that seat cushion contributes to the long life that you can expect from a hickory bark seat. Let's talk a little bit about the wood technology. What makes the joints in these chairs so strong? And it goes back hundreds of years in researching the history of these chairs. When I was writing my book, Making a Ladder Back Chair with Russ Filbeck, I did that research through the Appalachian Mountains in 2004 and started the writing in early 2005. But what I found was some interesting things. Was that most of us woodworkers know that if you have a round piece of wood, and as it's drying, the medullary rays in the end grain of that wood act sort of like the spokes in a bicycle wheel, and they prevent it from shrinking in that direction. It will shrink across the grain, or the radial grain, but not, or tangential grain, excuse me. It can shrink across the tangential grain, but not down the radial grain, radiating out from the pith. And so you get this oval shape. So knowing that, the early chair makers knew that they needed to dry their rungs, and they would make these rungs up in a kind of a rough size and take them inside their log cabins and by the fireplace, and they would dry them there by the open fire. And they called these fire-dried rounds. And then after they were dry, they would then carefully shape the tenon, and they would carve a little, what I call a neck around the end, but they call it a carefully crafted knob. But, you know, potato, whatever you want, it's the same thing. I think of it as a neck because this has shrunk, and this tenon is going to go inside of the chair leg, which still has moisture in it. This has been kiln dried, and when you put this tenon inside this leg and it's still wet, this is going to start absorbing moisture out of the leg, and it's going to start swelling. And at the same time, the leg is going to start shrinking. And it shrinks, the leg tissue shrinks down into this neck, and you can't take it apart without breaking it. And those early colonial mountaineers were so proud of their chairs because you couldn't take them apart without breaking them. And they would say, when you purchase chairs from me, you're done buying chairs. And they were that confident in their work. And so, but there's a little bit more to it. We've talked about this shrinkage issue, and I've got this round leg, what was a leg, and I drilled 3 holes, one parallel with the medullary rays, and one parallel with the growth rings, and one on the bias angle right in between. This one, after all of this dried, now these were tight when I put them together, this one fell out just because they all dried. So that, since the rungs on this chair basically have front rungs and side rungs 90 degrees apart, that means that half of my chair just fell apart because I didn't understand what was going on. But this one, however, is really, really tight, and so it stayed together. So if half of my chair is going to fall apart, that's not going to work. The solution is this one that's on the diagonal or bias angle to both the medullary rays and the growth rings, and I call that the chair maker's compromise. You're compromising between these two angles, and this 90 degrees to this one is also on this bias angle, and so both of them will get an equal amount of squeezing, rather than one getting squeezed a lot and the other one not getting squeezed at all. And so to show you what it looks like on the inside of that chair leg with the neck or knob, carefully crafted knob that the old timers called it, when you look on the interior of that, a cross section of that leg, you can see how this leg shrunk and completely filled in that neck. And there's no glue there. It just shrunk tight around that tenon, and there is no gap at all in that. Now, so we know that this chair maker's compromise is going to work beautifully. But what the heck happened to this guy that got squeezed really tight? Now we know this one fell out, and we know this one got squeezed really tight, but what happened? So let's take a look on the inside of the leg, and the one that got squeezed really tight has split the leg apart on the interior. And so it is going to fall apart also in a very short time when the daily expansion and contraction with humidity changes occurs. Both of them are going to come apart. Only the one on that diagonal angle will stay together for sure. And that is just such an important part of understanding what chair making is about